Chapter 15. Wonderful News. Looking into the cabin, Pete and Pam could make out a small, flickering fire in a corner fireplace. On a cot in front of it was a thin-faced man, and standing beside him were two bearded woodsmen. "The Greeble brothers," Pete whispered. As the three men talked, their voices began to rise. The one nicknamed Stocky shook a finger at the man who was lying down. "Listen here, Nelson," he said. "We want that dog. Where is she hiding?" At the name Nelson, both children gave a start. "Trevor Nelson," Pam said, shaking with excitement. "We've found him." "Shh," Pete warned. "Listen to what they're saying." When Mr. Nelson did not reply, the other brother said, "We'll find Fluff and her pups, so you might as well tell us. Where is she?" Trevor Nelson mumbled a reply, which the children could not hear. The Greebles looked disgusted and tramped toward the door on the far side of the room. Pete and Pam ducked out of sight and quickly discussed what to do. They could not hope to capture the men. "But," Pete said, "if they try to take Fluff and the pups, I'll stop them." "Oh, I hope she's well hidden and won't give herself away," Pam cried. Both children held their breath. There was not a sound from Fluff as the two men slammed the door and stalked off. In a few minutes, they disappeared from view. "Maybe we ought to go home and tell the police," Pete urged. "Come on." But Pam, who had turned to look in the window once more, said, "No, Pete, poor Mr. Nelson seems to be ill. We must see if we can help him." Pete led the way around the corner of the building to the door. "It's well hidden," he said, hunting for the latch. When the children stepped inside the almost bare shack, the man looked frightened for a moment. He struggled to sit up on the cot, feebly supporting himself on his elbows. "Don't be frightened," Pam said. "We're the Happy Hollisters, and we've come to help you." "And you're Trevor Nelson, aren't you?" Pete said, looking directly into the man's eyes. At this, the man sank back onto the cot and asked in a strained, husky voice, "The Happy Hollisters? You've come to help me? How did you know—" "Your sister is Pam's teacher," Pete said. "She wants desperately to find you. Miss Nelson hasn't heard from you for a year." Trevor Nelson reached out a hand and rested it on Pam's arm. "You mean she never received my letters? That's too bad. When I decided to go far away and not return until just before the race, I wrote her that. I guess the man I gave the letters to never mailed them." Trevor Nelson said he had arrived 3 days before and had been ill ever since. His food supply and the dog's meat was gone. 3 days ago?" Pete exclaimed. "Say, were you driving your team near the railroad last Saturday morning?" "Yes." "Where are your dogs?" Pam asked. "2 wicked men have stolen all but one since I got here. She's my lead dog, Fluff. Last year they tried to buy her cheap when she didn't win the race. Since I wouldn't sell, they attempted to steal her. That's why I hid." Pam told him about finding Fluff's puppies in the deserted barn, and Mr. Nelson managed a little smile. "Fluff is very smart," he said. "To fool those men, I told Fluff to take her pups away, and she did." "But she's brought them back again," Pam said, worried. "We must get them away before those men return." Mr. Nelson explained that the children would find the dogs in a secret, snow-covered kennel, which could be entered only through an opening in the rocks. He told Pete how to find it, and pointed to a flashlight on the mantel shelf. Pete took it and went outdoors. When he found the kennel, the boy leaned down, beamed the flashlight into the opening, and called, "Fluff? Come here, Fluff." At first there was no reply, but finally the fine head of the Eskimo dog appeared in the opening. "Your owner wants you," Pete said, patting the husky, "and your puppies too." The mother dog turned back into the kennel. A moment later, she returned carrying the gray pup. Pete held it while she went back for the other two. Pete took them all into the cabin again. Fluff bounded over to Trevor Nelson and licked his hand. The puppies nestled down before the fire. "What are their names?" Pam asked. "The buff one is Taffy, the white one Arctic, and the gray one Dawn," the man replied. He looked fondly at Fluff. "Old girl, my dream about the race is gone. You and I won't win it this year either. And the Mounties won't know how good your pups are, so they won't buy them." Pete tried to console the man. "Couldn't you get another team for Fluff and have somebody else drive them?" he suggested. "No, I don't think Fluff would work for anybody else," Mr. Nelson replied. Pam had gone to look out the window and said it was getting late. She and Pete ought to leave at once before it grew dark in the woods. At this moment, the children were suddenly startled to hear their names called. Pam rushed outside and around the shack, followed by Pete. At the top of the gully stood Holly with Ruthie Jansen. Both were on skis. "Oh, I'm glad we found you," Holly cried in relief. "Mother sent us to look for you at the barn and you weren't there." "We followed your footprints," Ruthie said. Quickly, Pete explained what had happened. Then he said, "On skis you can get back to the camp much faster than we can on foot. Hurry and ask Mother to phone for a doctor. And tell her Pete and I will come with Fluff and the pups," Pam added. The two young skiers excitedly glided away. Pete and Pam rushed back into the cabin to inform Mr. Nelson that medical help would soon come to him and that they would take the huskies home. "We'll guard the dogs well so the Greebles can't get them," Pete promised. "You're wonderful children," the sick man said. He turned to Fluff. "Go with them," he directed. When the children and the dogs reached the Hollisters' cabin, the excitement was intense. The whole family was there. Pete and Pam received plenty of praise. Gramp rushed over and put his arms around them. "You children have done what nobody else could," he cried. "You actually found Trevor Nelson." Graham explained that they had telephoned a doctor in town. He would be out immediately. "And what's more," Ricky spoke up, "Mr. Stamp's bringing him in his snowmobile, and they're going to get Mr. Nelson in it and drive him here." "I can play nurse," said Holly, "and help him get better." "Mother," said Pam, "don't you think we should notify Miss Nelson right away?" Mrs. Hollister nodded. "Go to Gramps' cabin and phone the telegraph office," she suggested. "And I'll walk over with you," Mr. Hollister spoke up, "and notify the Mounties about the Greebles." Just as they finished telephoning and sending the wire to Miss Nelson, the snowmobile drove into Snowflake Camp. Pam and her father followed it to their cabin. Mr. Stamp and a young man jumped out. "So you've found Trevor Nelson," Mr. Stamp said, as the family crowded around, and he introduced his companion, Dr. Jacques. "Where is he? We'll go for him immediately." "We'll show you," Pete offered, and he and Pam climbed aboard. On the way, the children told Mr. Stamp and the doctor the full story, and both men said they would like to help capture the Greebles. With Pete and Pam directing, it did not take the snowmobile long to reach the well-hidden shack. "I never could have found this myself," the doctor remarked. Pete and Pam waited outside with Mr. Stamp. In a few moments, the physician called them to come in. "Mr. Nelson's poor condition is due entirely to the strain of his long, hard drive from the North Country and the worry brought on by the Greebles. With rest and care and good food, he'll be all right in a month or so, but it's important that he leave here at once." The children assisted Trevor Nelson with his fur jacket and cap. Then Dr. Jacques threw several blankets around the man, and he and Mr. Stamp carried the dog breeder to the snowmobile. Mr. Stamp started the motor, and drove as fast as he could back to the Hollisters' cabin. "Right this way," Mrs. Hollister said. "Put him in our bedroom. We'll take care of him." "But this will be too much trouble," Trevor Nelson objected. Mrs. Hollister smiled. "I have 3 little nurses to assist me," she said. "Me first," Sue offered. "You can wear Daddy's pajamas, Mr. Nelson. I'll get some." While the doctor was in the room alone with his patient, Mr. Stamp patted Fluff and remarked, "It's certainly a shame that Trevor Nelson can't drive his sled in the race again this year. I'm sure this dog would win it." "But Mr. Nelson's other huskies were stolen by the Greebles," Pam spoke up. "We forgot to tell you that." She suddenly went to the window and looked out. The brothers' cabin was dark. Evidently the men had not returned, and the girl began to wonder if they ever would be caught. "I could find a couple of huskies," Mr. Stamp said in a low voice, as if talking to himself. "Fluff could lead any team to victory. If only I could find 2 more." Suddenly Pete stepped forward. "Mr. Stamp," he said, "we could borrow Pierre's dogs. I can manage a komatik. If I learned to drive a team well, could I enter the race?"